So everybody here can do math. That's not particularly rosy. That was, without the ERCs, a deficit budget. So a significant deficit budget. And you've also got the treasurer's report. I should say that David Fisher is also part of our leadership team. He's our treasurer. He puts together these treasurer's reports, which are fantastic and really summarize the condition of the church on a monthly basis. He and Tara Sternitsky, our parish bookkeeper, really come up with that every month. Sarah and Sarah, you will be extremely grateful that that treasurer's report happens, because it used to be me going through the financial statements, and it wasn't pretty. So it just as a procedural matter. So, but I invite you to read the treasurer's report and ask any questions that you might have about the financials. But last year we said there would be no PPP loan, and there wasn't, but there were these ERCs. I'm really, really pretty sure we have exhausted our ERCs, if I'm not mistaken. We will not be getting any more of those. We don't anticipate anything like a PPP loan or an ERC this year. So we're going to have to do this the old school way, which is we've got to drive up revenue. We've got to, be really careful about expenses. So our budget for 2023, which is on the table in front of you, is challenging. Committed giving is down significantly to somewhere around $375,000. You can see the pledge dashboard with about 90 pledging units. Neither of those are remotely high enough, frankly. We are facing challenges every time I've gotten up here and done this presentation, whether it's State of Grace or this annual meeting. I've talked about the challenges, and the great thing is we do have a great leadership team coming on board, and I think they'll have a good plan on how to increase revenue, how to get out there and put more people in the pews, and so I'm encouraged on that front. You could look at those financial statements and be pretty taken aback by them. I'm actually really sanguine about the future of Grace Church. I think it's going to be tremendous, and we're going to have some great years coming up, but it's going to take some effort. The pandemic, it just took a lot out of everybody, and we're still recovering. So we're just going to have to continue that process. But I know our leadership has great plans. So we have a deficit budget. I believe the budget came out to a deficit of about $106,000. That's not a great number. Our expenses will be down a little bit this year because of the transition and the interim rector and supply priests. That is sort of keeping expenses down a bit. There are other sort of expenses that will come down, but generally we need to get revenues up, and revenues come through the plate, and revenues come through committed giving. So I know that the new vestry and the new wardens will have a great plan for that. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. The deficit this year will be covered out of cash reserves, and I alluded to this in the fall, but the reason we have cash reserves, and Sarah Timms has been our endowment chair for 4 years. No good deed goes unpunished, right? So, but we've talked about it. Just very quickly, the endowment distribution that comes for really 3 things. 1 is outreach, 2 is special projects, and 3 is building maintenance. So we have not spent the entire vestry distribution for a number of years now on those things, and it has kind of gone to operating expenses. And we have crossed our T's and dotted our I's with the endowment committee to make sure that they know that some of those funds have gone back to operating expenses that are outside of the endowment charter, and we've asked for a hardship distribution again this year, which has been approved. The reason I say all this is because for this year, because those cash reserves have sort of built up, the unspent cash reserves, the unspent vestry endowment distribution has built up. we'll be able to cover our deficit, I think, but we will be able to cover our deficit this year out of cash reserves, meaning we will not have to ask for an additional distribution from the endowment this year. I will tell you that if committed giving does not go up this year, I would think that next year we will have to go into the endowment beyond the 5% that we get from the endowment. So that's, that's just going to be something that I think is going to happen. I don't know, but again, we've got to get revenues up. Dirk?
I think that the endowment says that we can take 5% of 3 years average of giving. I think is the way the charter is written.
Yes.
And so you're saying that we would be taking less than 5%?
No. What the 5% is actually the 5% is of the endowment, and so the endowment's about $3 million, give take, and so 5% of that has generally been somewhere around $150,000, and it's a number that for the last few years has just been 5% consistently, because we've needed that to. We actually, we'll get to it, but I think the vestry building maintenance, we actually will spend this year. We'll spend that full amount. Yeah, let Sarah speak to that.
I don't know if this clarifies, but yes, to Mike's point, the vestry gets a distribution from the endowment of up to 5% of that 3-year rolling. It has been about 150,000. Actually, last year it was more like 175,000. So what has been happening is the vestry is within the charter supposed to spend that 150,000 in those 3 buckets: the outreach, the seed money for new ministries, and then building improvements, right? So those are the 3. So let's say it's been 150,000 coming out. Through the pandemic, what happened was we didn't do as much outreach, right? We didn't have, it was a lean time in the church, and so people weren't spending money on those capital improvements. We still gave the endowment still gave the vestry the 150. It just wasn't all spent on those on those sort of okay 3 expenses. So what I think Mike is saying is we're going to do that again this year, right? So this year's budget in round numbers of that 150, 40 is going to go to outreach, 60 or 70 is earmarked for building improvements, and then where did I get to? 40, 70, 40,000 is going to be what we're calling a hardship distribution, right? So that hardship distribution is allowed to do things like keep the lights on, which is not what the endowment is intended to do, right? I think what Mike is, I think, correctly projecting is that if we don't get planned giving, committed giving up, and if we don't cut expenses in other places, which we've been loath to do, right, because it's some of that we don't get back, then maybe that 150 won't even suffice. So then the question is, would the vestry be asking for more than 5%? And there's also a mechanism for that, but it's something that just isn't sustainable. So we've really tried to avoid having the vestry ask for more than that 5%.
And to date, thank you, Sarah. To date, the vestry, to my knowledge, has never asked for more than 5%. So this would be the first time. Hopefully that won't happen. We'll do our best to figure it out and make sure, or not make sure, but try to make sure that doesn't happen. But it's out there, and it's our obligation to let you know as the parish what's going on with the endowment. Any other questions on financials? Because that was about all. I would normally go sort of line by line, but again, Reverend Reyes, everyone wants to hear from. So, any other questions? Awesome. Okay, some ministry reports. The music ministry, as you know, the choir sings wonderfully at every service with occasional accompanists. We do sung compline twice per month on Wednesdays at 9 o'clock, Andrew, correct? 8:30. 8:30 is the live stream. Okay. And you can find, by the way, you can find Compline on our YouTube channel and our other platforms. So to go back, because it really is, it's wonderful and it's contemplative. So we had our choir boot camp for the second year, which was very successful. And there will be a pilgrimage to Chester, England in July of 2023, and that's being we're doing that with St. Luke's Evanston. So, anything I missed? Christian Ed. The Grace Academy will have a new director for 23-24. The senior high and junior high youth groups are meeting weekly. We have a mission trip planned. Kevin is planning a mission trip to Tennessee. Where in Tennessee again?
Copper Hills, Tennessee was the site, an old copper mining area, was the site of the most recent Olympic whitewater rafting thing.
Yeah. So that's going to be terrific. And if you're interested, let Kevin know. Hugh and I are going to go, so it's going to be fun. And Children's Chapel has restarted. So that's Christian Ed. Altar Guild, the reason it's blank is because I got the best email in response, and I'm just going to read it here. So this is sort of a pitch. St. Mary's Altar Guild at Grace Church exists to prepare the holy objects used each week for sacraments and ready the church space for other services such as weddings and funerals. It's not about holy hardware or Yahweh's yard goods, which by the way, that's totally going to be the name of my band. But it's not about being female, reaching a certain age, ironing linen and polishing silver, or conserving fine objects, although St. Mary's includes members with all of these skills. Demographic attributes, talents, and interests. It's about offering time in short supply for most of us to prepare for the weekly Eucharist and other small but critical tasks that go towards making all services at Grace significant for those who enter its doors, whether literally or virtually. So I just thought that was absolutely terrific. That was Tricia McKibben who put that in. Especially love Yahweh's yard goods. Building and grounds, we did a chimney update at 142. Driveway patching and resurfacing is now, that's why I think we are going to spend the entire vestry building maintenance fund, because we need to resurface this driveway. That's been out there for a while. We've held off. I don't think we can hold off anymore. If you drive in over here, you know the concrete apron needs to be repaired. Your car probably knows that the concrete apron needs to be prepared. So we anticipate that we're going to spend the full vestry distribution. Outreach, this doesn't do justice to the wonderful email that Suzanne Fisher sent me. Suzanne Fisher heads up outreach for us. Oh, I should say Building and Grounds is Tom Kern and Jimmy Kingsfield, who have a great deal of knowledge about this place. So outreach, Suzanne, again, for the sake of summary, we've supported any number of different outreach initiatives. Just a few are Sandwich Board, DuPage Pads, Hinsdale Community Services. We made a big donation to Ukrainian refugees. At 2023, when I last stood up here, we talked a little bit about outreach and what outreach is. Outreach, I think it was Rick Hurd who said, outreach is really marketing, right? That's how we get our name out there. So we're always looking to expand our efforts in outreach, and to the extent that you have interest, Suzanne is always taking names. So, okay, that's it for me. Now for the interesting part.
My name is Sierra Reyes, and this is actually what I get paid to do, what we're doing now. But I'm also a priest, and so I also love worship. And for me, everything that we did in worship undergirds what we're going to talk about today as we think and pray and prepare. Okay, so because folks are joining us by live stream as well. Right. Very good. I do want to say that the people who are on live stream, I'm going to also include an electronic copy of this report, this sort of presentation. So for those who are joining us, they may not be able to see the screen. I want them to have the information. So what I hope that we can do today is talk a little bit about transition and the cycle of transition that we see within our communities, our worshiping communities. I want to talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the wardens and vestry when there is a rector vacancy. They're going to talk about what an interim rector is and what are the responsibilities that a rector, interim rector brings that are different than merely a supply priest. And then I want to talk to you about the process for how we find our rectors here in the Diocese of Chicago. It has been over a decade since you've gone through this process, and we have a new bishop within our diocese of Bishop Paula Clark, who as bishop has the prerogative to shape that process in ways that are necessary for the life of the church. She's a former transitions officer as well, and so she did that work in Washington, D.C., so has a real keen interest in how we do this prayerfully. I hope we can leave time for questions. It's around 11:48 now. I want to respect folks' time, so can we be together for the next hour or so? And my hope is by then we can have questions answered and know that this won't be the last time that you see me. I'll be working closely with your vestry and your search committee every step of this journey. For those who can't see the screen, I want to share with you, this comes from actually a business book from William Bridges of Managing Transitions. And in it, Bridges speaks about the flow or the trajectory that communities and individuals take when there is change and how each of us processes change differently. It starts with the ending of whatever that was. Last Sunday, you all had a wonderful celebration for your former rector, Chris, and his wife, Julie, and their family. And that was important. I speak with clergy sometimes clergy, we're an interesting bunch, and sometimes we don't want to have goodbye parties or don't want to be the center of attention. And I tell clergy, it's really not about you. It's about the congregation having the opportunity to close this chapter. It is important. And so you all, what you did last week was necessary to be able to mark with gratitude the tenure of your previous rector and now also turn to this in-between time. I want to note that on Bridges' model for managing change, there are different emotions that we feel at different parts of this journey. And I would say probably in this room right now, there are folks on every part of the scale, from relief to frustration and denial and everything in between. It's important to note that that transition zone, what Bridges calls the neutral zone, will be the posture that your church will be taking these next several months. And you should know, I'm just going to go ahead and say it up front, you will have conflict. You will have conflict and frustration because that is how human beings deal with change, especially as we are on that spectrum and we are at different places. So it's not a matter of trying to avoid the conflict during this time of transition. It's a matter of being aware of it and having safe processes to work through it and talk about it. Because what we want to have happen is that whatever that's left unsaid or hasn't been worked out it needs to be worked out now so that your new rector can truly have a blank slate in order to do ministry and not have to clean up that which has been left for them to clean up. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is not idle time. This is not idle time, but really it's an opportunity to call a thing and have some hard conversations around what has just occurred and how are we going to move forward as one, as Grace here in Hinsdale. Know that during this neutral zone, morale is down. And so we were just talking about budget. We were just talking about the needs of the community. It's going to be very important that in this time, the community is able to remain together. And so the vestry, part of your journey of leadership, will be ensuring that the community feels one in the midst of this, because there will be so many different reasons why people could feel like they're not involved or not a part of the community. So for your vestry to be mindful of that is very important. I invite also the vestry to take a look at this chart and see where you are. Where is the community? And hopefully our hope is that by the end of this period of transition, you'll begin another period of transition, which is when your new rector is with you and getting to know them and their leadership style. I now want to talk about the responsibilities that a warden and vestry have when there is a rector vacancy. This is found within our canons. What I love about the Episcopal Church is that we have process, and we have polity of how we are organized. And within our polity, rectors have tenure and have an incredible amount of responsibility for the property, ministries, and program of a congregation, of a church. When a rector is not in place, that authority is transferred to the wardens. Your junior and senior warden act in that role. What we hope is that for the junior and senior warden to have the support of your vestry, of your staff, of your community, because most junior and senior wardens have lives outside of church. So they say, that's what they say. So what we want to do is to be able to create a model of leadership that is sustainable for our leaders, for our wardens, for our vestry, so that they are able to do the work that they have been tasked and blessed to do, but also do it in a way that means others can follow behind them. I want to take a moment to thank the outgoing vestry members who have been really, really faithful in this time of departure for Father Chris and his family. I also want to particularly thank Mike. Mike, I know that you and Chris have had a journey together, but I want to say that in the conversations that we have had, there has been no doubt the love, the commitment you have for this place. And I thank you for that. And you will now show that commitment by giving the reins to Sarah and Sarah to continue this good work, to be our leaders in this time. Our vestry and our warden has already helped us in so many ways, our former warden, in scheduling supply clergy. As Mike said earlier, you all have supply clergy now through May, the end of May, which is a blessing. We have a lot of churches in transition right now, and so supply clergy are hard to come by. Mike could probably tell you in calling that list, many of our supply clergy are either retired or not in a parochial setting. They're not within churches. And it's hard to get a retired person to commit to multiple Sundays. They enjoy retirement. And so it's really hard. And so the gift that you've received is continuity of worship through the end of May. We also know that our wardens and vestry oversee the church operations. That includes the management of staff and personnel and building usage. During this time, it's a wonderful opportunity for vestry members to check in with the staff. This is This is a stressful, anxious time for everyone, but particularly people who live out their ministry through this community. And so we want to make sure they're also seen and heard and valued. And so making sure that church operations, through our personnel, through our building usage and how the building is used, all of that continues. It is our polity that an annual audit occur for all of our congregations, and the expectation is for that audit to continue even when there is a rector vacancy. Our wardens also interview and hire the interim rector. Each warden team decides how they want to go about doing that, if they want to have the vestry interview or just the wardens. We can talk about what are the benefits of either one, but really it lands on the wardens to secure an interim rector. For a church of your size, of your history, of the journey that you all have been through, we highly suggest having an interim rector and not moving straight into a search for your next rector. The interim, and I'm going to speak a little bit about what an interim does. There's some intentional responsibilities that an interim rector is trained to conduct that will be helpful for your incoming permanent rector. And then finally, your wardens and vestry will create a transparent process of inviting folks who would like to serve on the rector search committee. And I'm going to speak with the vestry specifically about what that means and what the duties of the search committee entail. Let me say, the search committee is not the place to try to correct or try to fix whatever you are upset about. That if you truly have a gripe that you need to process, being on the search committee is not the way to do that. And so we're going to talk about what are the gifts and skills we are looking for in our search committee so that you find who God is calling you to walk alongside in this next chapter. So these are the responsibilities, and I'm going to make myself available to the wardens and to the vestry to really answer any questions that you have in this in-between time. So let me define what an interim rector is. We reserve interim rector for clergy who are specifically trained in the art of interim ministry. There is a training that allows clergy to understand the needs, the vulnerabilities, and the creative hopes and opportunities there is when there is a vacancy, a time of transition. The responsibilities of the interim rector also alleviate your wardens and your vestry, because as an interim rector, they serve like a rector. So all of those responsibilities that we spoke about before that were the responsibility of your wardens and your vestry, your interim rector is able to step in and do those, from the worship and building and grounds to running our committees and being a source of knowledge and collaboration with your ministry areas. An interim rector truly is a gift, and it is a luxury to be able to have one. Many of our churches cannot afford an interim rector because interim rectors are paid the same way as other rectors and have necessary benefits. But for churches that have the blessing of being able to have an interim, and for churches who take seriously the responsibilities during an interim time, it will be a blessing for whoever is called to be your permanent rector. Other items to remember about an interim rector is that they function like a rector except for tenure. Interim rectors sign letters of agreement, and there is a understanding of the scope of time that an interim is with you. That can be extended if necessary, but all of this is written in writing so that both the congregation, the vestry, and the interim understand what is expected of this interim time. We spoke about compensation. I think, and I want to underline this third bullet, the interim rector may not be a candidate for the permanent position. We say this all the time, and this always comes up because what's going to happen, I'm going to say I can see into the future. And you are going to love your interim. That interim is going to come in and provide stability, provide pastoral care and sensitivity, and you're going to be like, can you just stay? And that interim, because as priests we love to be valued, you may get an interim and say, I really would like to stay. We train our interims. They need to listen to training. You can't say that. And they need to be prepared because as an interim, you're doing hard work, and you can't do that work if you're also gunning for the position. So we need an interim who's able to come in, to be with you for a season, and then to hand you off to your incoming leader. But I'm just saying it up front, you're going to fall in love with your interim. And I'm going to have a conversation with either your search committee or vestry asking, please. And I'm going to say, remember 12:02 on March 5th. And here's why. The goals of the interim are very particular to helping a congregation process that which needs to be processed so that they can prepare themselves for the person who comes who will not be your former rector, who won't move through the world like he did, who won't preach like he did, who won't lead like he will. They will be a totally different person. And you need to be able to embrace that and to be able to articulate who you are so that as candidates are discerning, if this is where God is calling them to do ministry, you're able to help that discernment by being clear about who you are. Every interim will tell you there are 5 areas that an interim focuses upon. Heritage, reviewing how the congregation has been shaped and formed, getting to know your history, getting to know what's the culture and the traditions of this place. You all are blessed to have people in your community that have been here from birth and can help shape that. And that's a heritage that we inherit, that we give either consciously or unconsciously to the next generation. So being able to name that story is important. Finally, second is mission, redefining the congregation's purpose, direction, identity, and values. For many of our congregations, the identity is very much tied into who their previous rector was. And so for some congregations, this interim time is a matter of prayerfully detaching that which was your rector and that which is truly your identity. And that takes time and intentionality. That is also a goal of the interim. Leadership, re-examining the leadership and the membership needs and ways of organizing and developing new and effective leadership. So the interim rector is going to be working closely with the vestry to really take inventory of what are the areas of leadership we need to take stock of and make sure that there is clear expectations of job description, of responsibility. The church loves to ask people to do something and never tell them when to stop. The church loves that. And so this is an opportunity to go to that ministry leader and say, are you able to continue this work? Would you like to have a concrete date when you would like to hand this over? Who would you like to hand this over to? The interim can help in that conversation so that the rector isn't coming in and having to make hard conversations around whether or not a person is fit for ministry or able to continue work. This helps the rector coming in to be as successful as he or she could be. Connections, rediscovering all the relationships a faith community builds outside of itself. So this is an opportunity to take inventory of the groups that use your space, the different community partners that you have, either through outreach or by other means, and truly be clear about What place does Grace Hinsdale have in the surrounding area? If Grace Hinsdale, the Lord forbid, were to close its doors tomorrow, would you be missed? And if so, what would you be missed for? And to be able to name that and to name it clearly. Because all of this is gathering data that will help your search committee, and we'll talk about that later. And then finally, the future, preparing and planning for new leadership and direction. It is not the interim's job to cast the vision for the church, but it is the interim's job to get the church ready for this work, to make sure there are processes and policies in place, making sure there are job descriptions and letters of agreement for all of your paid and volunteer staff, to make sure that people know what they're supposed to be doing. This is a time to get your house in order and to get ready for the guests that God has for you, which will become your rector. And so the interim has specific goals during this time, and we want the interim to be able to focus upon that. And what's a blessing, right now we have about 10 interims serving within the diocese, which is a large number of interims. We have a lot of churches in transition. And interims are always looking and thinking about their next call because they are time limited. And so part of the work that I would love to do with your wardens and your vestry is to think about what timeline you want to be on as we think about interim ministry and as we go down this road. And so this is the great time I'm thankful for the vestry being in place now because this is exciting work that we will be doing. So now I want to talk a little bit about the process for finding your rector and what we in the diocesan offices, how we facilitate this process. I want to first start by saying one of the gifts of being Episcopalian is that we are not congregationalists in our polity, but we are diocesan. And what I mean by that is that we are part of a larger whole, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but truly we do this together while also knowing there are particularities to every community, and the search committee is able to really see about that. So there are 4 areas or stages of the rector search process in this diocese: the getting started piece, the self-assessment, interviews and discernment, and new beginnings. That first quadrant of getting started is really overseen by your wardens and vestry. During this time, it is their responsibility to ensure that an interim rector is in place. And we at the diocese and our bishops' request is that search committees not be formed until your interim rector is in place, so that once you have done the work of having your interim, then the search work can begin. It is the vestry and your wardens that will oversee the process that will assemble your search committee, of how you go about doing that. And different churches do different things, really dependent upon the culture of the church. Some churches have an interview form that folks submit, some do nominations. It's all over the map. But really, whatever process you use, just as long as it is transparent, it is really your choice. That search committee, we recommend about a size of 6 to 8 or 9. It shouldn't be any more than 9 people. And that committee will really oversee the other quadrants, particularly the self-assessment and the interview stage of this process. It's also the vestry that makes sure all of the necessary technological needs of the committee is met, particularly the landing page on your website. And it's not a bad idea even now to have something on your website that says, we are in transition. Look to this space for more information in the months to come. Even if there's nothing to put on it right now, just going ahead and marking that, I think, will be helpful so that as we continue this process, you've got a place to go to put information and people know where to go in the community to learn more about where we are. The second item, after the search committee has been appointed and been commissioned, we think that's really important. Just like we commissioned the vestry this morning, we commissioned the search committee to do their work. And they have 2 main tasks during this time of self-assessment: gathering data and then presenting that data in the form of written documents that make up your parish profile. Let me speak about the gathering of data. Within this diocese, we have two forms of data collection, if you will. The first is a survey that we call the CAT survey, which stands for Congregational Assessment Tool. Has anyone ever heard of the CAT or has done the CAT? Amen. So you have already, will be a benefit to your search committee that you're aware of this tool. It is from a consulting firm called Holy Cow Consulting. They work with churches all over the country in being able to name the items of vitality and satisfaction within a church. What I love about the CAT and why the Diocese of Chicago has used the CAT for over 20 years is that it helps churches see where they are in relationship to other churches, regardless of faith tradition or region, to really see how you stack up, and not just within the Episcopal Church, but churches overall. And I think that's important to be able to take inventory of what are the particular gifts that you bring and what are the areas of improvement that would be helpful as you move through this time as church. And so it's a really great tool. We recommend you do the CAT, but I'll speak with the search committee that if you have another tool that you would rather use, let's be in conversation and we can use different tools. But we have a relationship with Holy Cow, and that is something that our churches have been using. We also invite small group interviews, and these are times for around tables such as these. Groups of your community can come together and ask questions around what are we looking for in our next rector? What are the personality traits or skill sets that we're looking for? What are the strengths of this community? And where do we really need to pay attention to who we are and where we're going? Your small group process, those interviews will be crucial for your committee to take that information along with what the survey provides and create your written documents in the form of a parish profile and an OTM form. OTM stands for Office of Transition Ministry, and it is a form that every church fills out and every priest fills out. And so you will receive a accompanying OTM form from every priest who applies for the position. So a church fills one out, and every priest that's looking also fills one out. I want to say right now, like I said, we have 122 congregations in the Diocese of Chicago, and 24 are in some form of search. We have 6 congregations that are open and live right now receiving names. So you can go to our diocesan website and go to the clergy resources page, go to clergy openings, and you'll be able to see the descriptions, the parish profiles of our churches that are currently in search. And that they're all over our diocese, and we have more that are about to become live just next week. Yes.
I don't know if this is an easy answer, and if it needs to be tabled for later, fine, but can you talk to us a little bit about why, as the Episcopal Church, we go through a process like this versus having the Catholic Church pluck a priest for us to place it, versus the private sector having an interview process and a search firm? And if that's not an easy question, then we can table it.
It's a question that comes up every time we have the conversation because of the various ways, not just communities, but even within churches, the diversity of ways that churches find their leadership. I would say within the Episcopal Church, we have an understanding of the parish knowing what is best for them than a diocesan office. So we really promote congregationally led searches so that the congregation can be at the forefront of naming the gifts and skills they would like to see in their next priest. We also, alongside of that, know that our churches are in different financial situations, different capabilities of searching for full-time clergy. And so we are not a top-down approach unless the church requests it. So in all of this, as a parish of the diocese, the vestry could say, you know what? We don't want to do any of this. Just bring somebody here and pluck them down and let's go ahead and get started. They would have that prerogative. We would say, are you sure? But you have that. It's a conversation with the bishop, and our bishop wants to hear what is best for the congregation. Whatever is best for the congregation, that's what we want to do. I will also say the church is a beautiful vessel that is slow to turn. And so this is a process that we have had for a long time, and the church is changing. For the last 10 years, we have retired more clergy than we've ordained. And so what we're now running into is that churches of your size may have received dozens upon dozens of names in previous generations, and we're seeing fewer names being placed within our searches. And so every diocese is having to have a conversation of, does this model fit the needs of our communities now? And I'm thankful for a new bishop that is able to see with new eyes. But that's above my pay grade. So this is the process we have now. And I know our bishop would love to speak with you if you have ideas of how it could be different. But our process now is, does that answer your question? And so with that self-assessment, with those documents, we then send your profile across the country and even the world. We've got a church now that's in search, and they're opening their search to international candidates. And what's beautiful about our tradition, being part of the Anglican Communion, is that we are a global church. And so there are some advantages and disadvantages of that. That lengthens your process, but it also opens up an entire communion to you as far as talented clergy. Then our search committee moves into the discernment phase, where they are actually dealing with the paper applications, the Zoom interviews of these candidates. We have a template for our search committee to go through, and they're able to tailor it. I go to the search committee and we do an orientation of their work. I also come back to them after their position is live to talk about how to organize yourself in the interviewing phase. This is a highly confidential stage as we're dealing with priests who are in discernment. Many of them, their churches won't know at this phase if they are looking. And so it's important to have confidentiality. So you may think that the search committee is kind of underground and you haven't heard much of what's going on. Likely it's because they're in this process of interviewing candidates. The way that the process works within our diocese is that the search committee recommends one name for the vestry. In our polity, the vestry remains the ecclesial authority of the faith community. So it is the vestry's vote that makes a person your rector-elect. But the way that this process works is that the vestry delegates the work of the search to a search committee. But the search committee serves on the behalf of the congregation and the vestry, which is why the vestry is so involved in the assembling of that search committee. And so that name is recommended to the vestry. Let me say something about the in-person interview. That this is a stage that is mandatory, that every candidate or finalist that your search committee decides upon, we ask that you bring them to Chicago, bring them to Hinsdale for an on-site visit, for them to be able to see the space and do a closed Eucharist, which means it will be a service at your altar with your search committee and your vestry, where that candidate will preach and celebrate. And it's an opportunity for the vestry and the search committee to really discern through worship if this is who God is calling to be your next rector. We also ask during that visit that the candidate come to 65 East Huron downtown and meet with our bishop, and to have an opportunity for the bishop to meet this candidate and be able to tell that candidate about the culture of being part of the clergy here in the Diocese of Chicago. We also in the office take them out to lunch. That's my favorite part because we go, it is so wonderful going to all the different places, restaurants. And so we also want to be hospitable to this candidate because they will be our colleague, and we want them to know that they have the full support of their diocese. And this is a mutual discernment for the candidate as well. So I will talk with the search committee about this process of how to do that. It is it's a relic of previous years when search committees would do visits to potential candidates, like going to see a priest when they're sort of natural habitat, so to speak. If you were to do that, that is definitely the prerogative of the vestry because the funds would need to be available for those visits. Many churches are deciding not to do that because of the cost, because you know you're going to get a priest from Hawaii, that you're going to have to go to Hawaii. There will always be a priest from Hawaii. So that's a conversation for the vestry, the search committee to have around just sort of how do we want to use our resources. Once the search committee has done their work by recommending the name to the vestry, the wardens and vestry now pick back up the baton, and the search committee has completed their work. The vestry then discerns and votes upon this name that the search committee has recommended. It is the vestry's prerogative to say yes or no. This is not a blank check that a vestry is supposed to just sign. They are prayerfully to make this decision. We have not had a church in our recent history in the last 15 years where the vestry and the search committee were of different minds. We have not had that. And so, but it could happen. And so if that is the case, I would love to speak with our vestry, our search committee, so we can talk about what's going on. We can get to the root of it. But usually the vestry trusts and gives thanks to God for the hard work, the many months that the search committee has been working. It is then after that vote of the vestry, the bishop is notified, and then the wardens have the green light to reach out to that rector-elect to offer them the position. There is no public announcement of this agreement until the letter of agreement has been signed, and you coordinate with the rector-elect around communication with their current faith community if they're currently serving as rector elsewhere in the church.
So it's very important, I think if I understand your process right,
Yes.
it's really important that the community be involved early in the CAT survey and talking to the vestry, because that's the only time the congregation as a whole in this process will be able to be involved. Is that accurate?
Amen. Yes. Very accurate. Very accurate. And I think that's a great. I want to say one thing, and then we're going to go to that point that you just made. But the question that we get a lot is, how long is this going to take? How long? How long is this going to take? Yes. The answer is depends. There's so many factors that are at work. How frequent your search committee is meeting, making sure that your search committee is commissioned and realize that this is a commitment of about 12 months. So they need to be aware of, can they say yes to this? Can they say yes? Utilizing co-chairs instead of a single leader. We're dealing with this in one of our churches where a church has a single search committee chair, and life happened to that search committee chair. Bless her heart. And they slowed down based on the speed of her life. And she feels awful because you don't want the whole church's leadership model to be based on your personal availability, but that's what has occurred. So we encourage search committees to have co-chairs. God sent us out, Jesus sent us out 2 by 2. Let's go out 2 by 2 in our leaders. It also how long it takes, the general health of the parish. If there's significant grief, significant conflict within a community, that may prolong the process. And so it's important to be real about what is happening within your community so that you can be prepared for your next rector. The length of time for doing the work. Christmas and Easter are always delays. In fact, our churches that are open now, we've basically added a week to receiving names because Holy Week is just lost. Priests aren't applying for positions during Holy Week. Usually the week after Easter, we get applications. And so it gives us some time for priests to be able to work on their calendar. And then the circumstances of the incoming priest. What we're seeing is that many of our calls are on the school cycle. If we have clergy that have families, summer is a popular time for people to move. And so with that, we get a lot of our transitions occurring during the summer so that by the fall, the priest is in place. But priests can arrive at any point of the year. So as the congregation, how can you be involved in this time? I would say this is so important for you to remain a part of the community, not to stand on the sidelines, but to truly continue to give, continue to be a part of the news of this community. If you're not subscribed to Grace Notes, please do. Also subscribe to our diocesan newsletter. That's also a wonderful opportunity just to hear what's going on throughout the life of the church. To participate, when you are given the application or the invitation to fill out the survey, do so. It's going to take some time, but carve out some time for yourself to sit at the computer and to fill out that survey. And to also help for those who do not have computer access, we have ways of making sure they're able to be heard as well. And then, and I truly believe this, to pray. Pray for your church. Pray for your leaders. Pray for that rector who doesn't even know that God is calling them yet. Pray for this entire time so that we can really be saturated in God's goodness and blessing, because God needs to be all over this for this to work. And so through that, I invite you to the search committee, once they get commissioned, the search committee write a prayer that can be said during worship every Sunday, so that as a community, you're praying for this process. And it's reminded, everybody is reminded that this is really a holy, holy time. And to pray for our church right now as well, because so many things are changing. And yet, in the midst of that change, there's opportunity for us to be the church. Because I truly think that God is not through with the Episcopal Church, nor is God through with faith communities for people to find belonging. And perhaps more than ever, people need to know that they are not walking life's journey alone. And a lot of people feel alone right now. And the church, through all of you being here, provide a place for people to see and encounter and get to know God. So we matter. And so I'm thankful for our leaders in helping us walk through this transition. This is my contact information, my email, my phone number. You are welcome to contact me with any questions. I'm going to be in communication with your wardens. Would love to have an opportunity to sit down with your new vestry and talk about some of these things in more depth. But I want to leave an opportunity for questions and comments for our remaining time. Yes.
I would imagine that most of us here at Grace would say Grace is a very attractive place.
Yes.
Great church. I'm interested in your perspective on what the reputation of Grace is, and especially given that other churches are going through the same process. Maybe we're in competition with them, maybe we're not, but sort of how do you see us
Yeah, that's interesting.
fitting in with all these other transitions?
I should preface by saying I'm new to the diocese, so I don't have the institutional memory that many of my colleagues have around where you have been and where you're going. When I hear Grace, I always hear the beauty of your worship space. That comes up first and foremost. The beauty of your worship space and your ministry of music, and how your liturgy is truly the foundation of who you are. I hear that a lot. I don't know the history, but I hear you're a complicated parish. I don't know what that means. But I've heard complicated, and so that tells me that it could be really easy to kind of sweep things under the rug, because that has been done in previous searches. Maybe, who knows? I wasn't here, so I can't speak to that. But I will say, you won't have any. Let me say it a different way. You are an attractive church to apply to. And so you will have applicants. Some of our churches aren't receiving applications. You will receive applications. The discernment of the search committee will be, what are the gifts we need for this next chapter of not who we are now, but who is God calling us to be? And you want a leader to be able to help you through that, to get to that point. So I think everything I've heard about Grace has been positive with complication, but I don't know any church in our diocese that's not complicated. But I also think it means, too, that you all have, because of the generations that have come before you, you have a stability that many of our churches don't have. And I'm thankful for the conversation around how to be good stewards of that stability, so that you can be around for other generations to come. Yes, sir.
Following up on David's question, talk a little bit more, or explain a bit more, if you can, about the guiding hand that you and the bishop play in this process. And I ask this question in part because, as you can tell, I've been around here for a while.
Amen.
I've gone through two searches
Mm.
where I know that the bishop has played a role and in guiding us to a certain direction. So
Mm.
can you talk a little bit about that?
So I can speak to Bishop Clark's philosophy around searches. Bishop Clark puts a lot of trust in the search committee. And so unless there is a upfront expectation for the bishop to place a candidate, it is truly our polity that the congregation runs that process. My role is to provide scaffolding and resources for that committee. Many of our committee members, this is their gift of their church, their time, and it is not their primary employment. And so to be able to be a resource to help provide a timeline, template, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel for a letter that you share with a candidate that you're not moving them forward, or questions that you would like to ask in the interview that are relevant to priests and our ministry. None of that is out of the blue, but you can use it to tailor to what you're looking for. I find my role to be a point of communication so that there are no surprises for the search committee, and for the vestry to be aware of what lanes that they are in, that the vestry truly, by commissioning the search committee, gives them the authority to do their work and not sort of stand over them and ask at every moment, so how are we doing, how are we doing, how are we doing? You know, so like to truly empower our leaders. I would need to sort of speak with you more about how bishops in the past have inserted themselves. But I will say, regardless of the bishop, we want our churches to be led by healthy, talented clergy. That's helpful to the diocese and the health of our diocese. And so we want what's best for you, and we don't want to be the person or the thing that is the obstacle for you to find that next leader. So my hope is that our office is not causing any headaches, but really being a point of information and facilitation to our search committee. Does that answer your question? And thank you for your service on previous search committees. Thank you. Yes, please.
I was wondering, we have supply freeze lined up till the end of May. Is it anticipated that we would have an interim then shortly thereafter? How many people are out there? How long does that process take? You could speak a little to that.
Yes, and so that's why I would love to make an appointment to speak with your wardens. That will be the topic of our conversation of what timeline we want to have.
Is that realistic that we would have an interim in place this summer?
I've learned not to promise anything. Let me say this. There are interims that do not want to have breaks in ministry. And so the question is there an interim available at the time that you're wanting to begin, which is why we have this conversation now in March for June or whenever that will be. And so we'll speak as our wardens as far as what your timeline would be. I think having a conversation with the vestry around are we able to, through our budget and finances, commit to a letter of agreement with an interim, and we can have conversation around that. But that's at the forefront of my mind because I don't want you all to miss a person that may be available if the timing doesn't line up. Yes, and then here, but here first.
So I believe it was said earlier that the search committee process should not start until there's an interim in place.
Right.
So we're saying maybe that's this summer, maybe not. So other than the CATS questionnaire, what does the church and the vestry do between now and early March and maybe this summer, call it 4, 5, 6 months? What else do we do?
That's a great question. Well, I would say there's a lot to do. I think I would love to advocate for a way to process what you've just gone through and the ending of that tenure of your rector. And what learnings, what lessons are we taking from that experience? For those who are hurt by that time, I hope they're given an opportunity to share that in a safe space so they're not having to carry that grief and really not know what to do with it. For those who believe that this is now a time of excitement for the church, I hope they're given an opportunity to share that and to be able to say why they feel God has more for us to do and to share that enthusiasm. But this was not a departure that didn't cause some healing. There's some healing that needs to occur. And so I would say some intentionality around that is a great way to spend this time. I would also say this is also a great time to put some inventory in who you are as a community, making sure that there are job descriptions in place for all of our staff, making sure that you have a way to regularly communicate with your ministry leaders, to really organize yourself so that you can continue to do church with the leaders that you now have in place. So there's a lot to do. It's just a matter of being intentional about what we do so that it can prepare us for the time when things really get started with the search committee being in place. Does that answer your question? Okay, we had a question here and then back here.
I just have a comment. For those streaming, could you repeat the question?
Oh, yes, thank you. The question was around what should be the goals of the church in the here and now between the time of now and when an interim arrives, knowing that we don't know the exact date of when that interim will be arriving. So how do we use this time to our benefit? Thank you for that reminder. So what I want to be sure I'm correct in saying that you're praying for good health for whoever God calls to be the next rector so that they can do this role with with clarity and with health. Is that fair? Is that fair? Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
Coming from the private sector and having no knowledge about how compensation works in
Yes,
this
yes.
model, can you, without giving away anything specific or confidential, discuss how that gets set here? And do priests move from one congregation to another to up their income? And I'm not saying that in a pejorative way, but I just want to understand.
Thank you, yeah.
You know, when I look at the pledging, I'm like, I don't think we're an attractive place to come to. I'm very sad when I look at that.
Mm,
But then, are you saying we're attractive because one of the factors is we would stack up favorably on compensation?
mm,
And then does compensation get adjusted to the person?
mm,
So if you have a candidate who's at one level and you want to improve that level, anything you can discuss
yeah.
generally, because I don't have any idea.
Amen.
how any of that works.
Amen. No, absolutely. I'll start by saying within our diocese, we have a minimum compensation package that churches who are hiring for full-time must meet that criteria. Depends upon whether or not there's a rectory. If there is a rectory included in the compensation, that lowers the cash stipend that would be a part of that package. And all of our clergy, regardless of housing or the amount of compensation, must provide health care for our families, the canons say it has to be at least for the clergy. And my hope is a church would see a clergy, if they have a family, for that to be included as well. But that's a matter of negotiation. Insurance costs have gone up considerably. And within our tradition, every priest working more than 5 months and above part-time must be active within our pension. And that's an 18% assessment on top of the compensation that the priest doesn't see but is paid into the church pension group for their later retirement. The reality is that many of our churches cannot afford full-time ministry. So the fact that you're able to afford it, even if it is at a level that you wish to improve, more power to you, but the fact that you can afford it puts you at a level that many of our churches can't reach. So that's one. Two, the vestry is responsible for setting the compensation scale for this position. The search committee does not have the luxury or ability to negotiate that. That remains with the vestry. And so in that quadrant, we spoke about that new beginnings piece. That negotiation happens at this stage between the wardens and the rector-elect. I think finally, just to say, this is a calling. And so in this vocation, folks know what the spectrum of our churches typically is, and that is not a deter. That won't deter someone if they feel God is calling them. But what we're running into is that it is now just more expensive to live. And so the cost of living is coming up, and many of our churches aren't able to keep up with that. I think that as a vestry, knowing your finances and your resources, being able to put together an attractive package, I can assist the vestry with that. If for a church of this size, for the amount or the skill set you're looking for, what you can expect to pay, and of your peers, sort of comparables, I think in another word they use, comparables. And so we could talk about that and sort of so that you're on par with other churches that will be looking. But there are a lot of churches that are looking right now. So does that answer your question? Thank you. And the question was about compensation, if I didn't repeat that for those on live stream. Okay, we're going to go here, here, and then here, here. All right, here.
How do we think about hiring, if we needed to do hiring during this whole extended process, please?
I'm so thankful you asked that. I am going to, I don't think I have internet. Yeah, so the question was, if there's a question around hiring personnel, what resources are there for our vestry and wardens? I am...
And even beyond that, how do we as a community, how does the vestry think about
Right, right. I think it is the prerogative of the wardens and vestry to decide what are the staffing needs necessary to continue to do ministry that are within our resources. That is a decision for the vestry, for the wardens and vestry. Within the diocesan staff, we have several resources of my colleagues who can help in various segments of church operations around human resources, of personnel, hiring, how to do that. Anna Stefaniak, who is my colleague, is a wonderful resource and speaks to church wardens every day around those types of questions. If you have questions around property, real estate, buildings, Tom Kamel is the liaison to bishops and trustees. He's a wonderful resource for making sure there's space useful agreements and making sure if you are thinking about changing your real estate portfolio, you're doing so that's within our canons. I'm available for any questions around programming, or I can do a mutual ministry between the vestry and the interim if things aren't working well, so we can really make sure that feedback is occurring. So our hope is that the diocese can be a resource for any questions that the wardens and vestry may encounter during this time. Thank you. And then here.
I was just going to ask a quick question. So Mike didn't paint a super rosy picture from a financial perspective when we first started. And so we've already had a huge contraction post-COVID
Yeah.
in the size of the parish, which is obvious when you show up Sunday to Sunday.
Yeah.
Do you expect a further contraction during the interim period? And if so, are there ways to guard against it? Do we lean on the diocese for that? If there's any sort of best practices to be mindful of?
Not lean on the diocese. That's one. Let's see. I think that's really a question for your vestry. It's hard for me to answer that. I will say that the way that we've done church has been, I think, permanently changed from COVID. I don't think we will go back to what church looked like before March 2020. And I think there's some grief in that, but I also think that there's some opportunities as well. And I think for each congregation to be able to answer the question of how is God calling us to be church in this particular corner of God's vineyard? What can we do here to really make a difference in our community? I think that's really how the church, the leaders can answer the question, because people want to give to something that they know is bigger than just keeping the lights on. You know, they want to give to something, although we need to keep the lights on. But why does this church matter? And to be able to answer that question clear-headed and with clarity will help folks feel like we need to be a part of making sure this continues. Does that answer your question? It shouldn't, because I didn't, but your vestry will. Oh, you're on the vestry. Right.
And so if you have dwindling numbers, I just want to know if we should expect there to be, because you're not going to have like a cohesive vision sort of moving forward. You're going to be presenting to the community that you're in transition.
Right.
It might not be as desirable to the church down the road, right? When you're talking to younger families. And so it's like, all right, well, how are we going to mitigate that? And I think we can do that.
Right.
If you're like, yeah, we normally see like a 10 to 20% fall off.
Right.
That would just be sort of helpful.
No, I get your question. I think that's a conversation for the vestry. But I would also say I believe the church is the community. And even during transition, you will have people coming through your doors looking for community. And if you have a newcomer ministry or some way to welcome new folks, that shouldn't go on hiatus. Or if you don't have one, start one so that folks that come to the community, they are brought into the fold. So I still think there's a lot to do even in the midst of this interim, this transition time. Then we had a question over here. No? Okay. And then here front?
You asked my question.
All right. Any?
Well, one add on to that. So
Okay.
through this transition, right, there's a sense of urgency,
Yeah.
right, going from 151 pledges to 91. How do we, or how does the church bring in new folks? Or is there any advice on outreach? How do you position that message? Hey, we're in transition, but still come in and check us out.
I think the emphasis should be on being faithful as the people of God in this place and what that looks like, whatever that looks like, particular to Grace Hinsdale. If the focus is on getting butts in pews, that's a focus that would detract from the other work that needs to occur. So many of our churches want to have folks in the pews, but are not mindful of what is the environment and the culture we're inviting people to. Is our church truly welcoming? Are people truly hospitable if this is someone that you've never seen before? We want to invite people, but let's take account and stock of what we're inviting them to. And I think if you focus on that, I think that puts you in a better position to then make the case when a person walks through the door and say, what can you, how can I walk with you in this journey? But I'm a priest, so that's where I'm supposed to be thinking, right? And so the beautiful thing about our church is that we have a holistic way of looking at these. And so we have lay folks who are also thinking about the business side of it. But I think even in the midst of this transition, your vestry, providing opportunities for continued relationship building as your community, making sure you all are still seeing each other. How do you all build relationships outside of Sunday morning? How do you have the identity of what does it mean to be part of Grace Hinsdale? Do you all have fun together? How do you all have fun? You know, those types of things will increase increase your preparation to be able to meet that family or that single person who's looking for a church home. But have fun, y'all. Yes.
I was just going to ask, of the 122 churches
Yes, yes.
in the diocese, how many have full-time rectors or are looking for full-time rectors? Is it most? Is it half?
24 are searching. Of those 24, 6 are currently open now. I would say, hold on, I can tell you now. I shouldn't tell. I don't want y'all to see all my business. Let me. Let's see. Okay, so give or take, we've got about 24 churches that are open. Of those 24, half of them cannot afford full-time clergy and are in some sort of permanent supply, extended supply model. And I would say a good 12, the other 12, are able to afford either part-time or full-time. Part-time, we've got 2 churches now that are open that are part-time, Grace Galena, St. Luke's Dixon. And they've been open for quite a while of trying to receive names. As you can imagine, it's hard to recruit part-time clergy. And so there's definitely a lot of transition that's occurring. But I think from what I can see from where you all are poised. You all are a leader among our diocese around the capability to attract clergy from outside the diocese and beyond. You all have a beautiful building and grounds that's obviously well taken care of. I always look at churches' bathrooms. That's a great way to see sort of the state of a church, you know. You all have great bathrooms. And so you are poised in a way that allows you to really do some exciting things in this next chapter.
What about the churches that aren't looking? I mean, is it most of them have full-time rectors or, I mean, what is it sort of the model within our diocese right now?
Yeah, it's changing across the church. It used to be that full-time clergy was the norm. That's now becoming a luxury. And I think as a church, many of our bishops are having real conversations around bivocational priests and realizing that will need to be a bigger conversation as we continue to move down the road. And so for churches that can provide a living wage for full-time ministry, that is a strength. It truly is. I want to be mindful of people's time. I know some folks need to go. I'm available. There's here, and then our warden.
Yeah, just generally, I've heard about a position that's called priest in charge.
Yes.
What is the difference between a priest in charge and a rector, and is that something we need to know?
That's a great question. So, a priest in charge is a title that is used in our canons to signify a clergy member that is the head of a congregation, but does not have the tenure of a rector. It is very hard to remove a rector from their position because rectors have tenure. Priests in charge have more time limited, and all of our clergy who are 72 or older, even if they are rectors, revert to a priest in charge title because that's our mandatory retirement age. Not that they have to cease ministry, but they then become on a year-to-year permission from our bishop. And so the priest in charge doesn't carry the tenure, but it carries the same authority and responsibilities. Many churches have decided to do a 3-year priest in charge and sort of try out if this rector thing is working before calling a rector. And that's a conversation I can have with the search committee about the pros and cons of that. You limit who you attract. Many priests would want tenure if they're going to move cross-country with their families. And so but let's say you have a candidate who's just out of seminary who hasn't done this before. A priest in charge model will be probably a better route to go than rector. And you could work toward rector after a 3-year or some sort of period of time. Thank you. You're welcome. There was a question here, Sarah.
I was just going to ask about sort of any support that the diocese gives for sort of surrounding pastoral emergencies, right? So life is going to happen to everyone
Yes.
in the room, and we are here because we feel we need
Amen.
support of clergy. What does that look like in this period?
Great question, and I'm thankful for the question because it's important for us to know. The way that our diocese is arranged, we have deaneries. We have clusters of churches within geographical areas that are overseen by a dean. I believe this deanery, we are in the Oak Park Deanery. Hey, y'all know your deaneries, yes. So John Ruppel, who is the rector of Grace Oak Park, is your dean. Making contact with him would be ideal to say we are the new wardens here, and we would love to see what support the deanery can provide, whether it is a name of a non-parochial priest that could help in that regard, or he maybe have other ideas. But the deans are having these conversations around how to ensure pastoral coverage for our churches that are in transition. And his name is John Rumpel. He's the rector of Grace Oak Park. Know that I am available anytime for questions. Thank you for your hospitality of me today. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Reverend Reyes. I think we need a motion to conclude the annual meeting. Anna Ferguson, second. Marianne Herring. All in favor of concluding the annual meeting? Aye. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you.